All right, there are two different kinds of football. There's real football, which is soccer, and then there's American football, which is what we're going to use to teach integers today. So this is a football field. The purpose of football is to try to get the funky shaped ball across the end zone and score points. And as teams try to do that, they're going to gain and lose yards. Let's start with something easy. Let's say on 2 plays, a team gains 7 yards and then they gain 4 yards. That means that they have gained 11 yards altogether. Well, let's say that this is not a good team, like, the Patriots, and instead it's a terrible team. And I'm not going to name names here, but let's say that this is a kind of team that does not gain yardage. Let's say this is the kind of team that loses yards every play. So they're supposed to be going, that away, but instead the defense keeps pushing them back in the wrong direction. So they've lost 7 yards and they've lost 2 yards. That means that they've lost 9 yards altogether. This is us adding integers together. For the first one, we added 2 positive numbers to get another positive number in the end. And then in the second one, we added 2 negative numbers to get a negative yardage in the end. And as much as it sometimes feels like your team is constantly losing yards, it's never just gaining or just losing. They end up with a complex mix of both. So let's say that on the first play, your team gains 7 yards, but then on the second play, they lose 2 yards. What's their total yardage? We look and you have 7 positive yards and 2 negative yards. So if they've moved 7 in the direction that you want to go, but then they worked backwards 2 in the direction you didn't want to go, overall, they've made it 5 yards. See, when the signs are different like that, we're subtracting the numbers. And to determine if it's going to be a positive or negative again, we look at what happened more. Did we gain more yards than we lost? Yeah, so my answer is positive. Whereas if they gained only 2 and lost 7, so that would look like this, plus 2, and then, backwards 7 yards, then that's leaving us with a 5-yard gap in the wrong direction, giving us negative 5 yards. So before, when the signs were the same, like gaining yards and gaining yards, it's just compounded together. And it just gives you a bigger positive or losing yards, or a bigger negative number. But when the signs are different like this, a positive 2 and a negative 7, those absolute values, 2 and 7, get subtracted, and we keep the sign of the bigger number. Since we have this big football field in front of us, let's start using some bigger numbers. Let's say that you're starting at the end zone at 0 yards. And let's say that you gain 50 yards, but then you go backwards the next drill 20. That means that you're ending up at 30 yards. So when I have positive 50, subtract 20, you end up with a positive 30. But instead, maybe you aren't that good, and instead of going 50 and then back 20, let's say that we start somewhere else, maybe this yard line, the 30-yard line. This is our new 0. And we only gained 20 yards, but then on the next play, we lost 30. We're now all the way back at negative 10. Gain 20, lose 30, negative 10. When we look at these as just numbers, because we're not always going to have a football field in front of us, my signs are different. When I combine them, I subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number because I lost more than I gained. So when the signs are the same, like negative 10 and negative 5, we add both of those values because they're both negative and keep the negative sign. Or maybe it's just 10 plus 5. Add both of the values and keep the positive sign. But when the signs are different, negative 10, positive 5, we're actually subtracting the 10 and 5 and keeping the sign of the larger number. Thus begins our notes. Let's start with something easy, like when each term only has one sign. If the signs are different, we subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number. When the signs are different, we subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number. But when the signs are the same, a -8 and a -9, I'm taking 8 away and I'm taking 9 away, so I'm now taking 17 away altogether. So here are 3 for you to try. Try them on your own using the same strategy that I just showed you, and then play and check and see if you got it right. So for the first one, a -7 and a +10. Since the signs are different, I subtract, and I keep the sign of the larger number. Whereas on the second one, I have 7 positives, but I'm taking 10 away. I'm taking away more than I have, so I end up with a -3. And on the last problem, I have a -7 and a -10, so I'm taking away 17 altogether. Now, if you're struggling with this, listen up for this next part, because I'm going to explain it in a different way than football, well, American football. And I'm going to explain it using money. If you're feeling pretty good about it, you can go ahead and fast forward to example 2, where I show you double sign problems. So still struggling? Let's think about it in terms of money, 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 money. If someone has a debt of $7, but then they have $10, 7 of those positive dollars go to paying off the debt, and you're left with +3. Now, kids in the past have really benefited from me changing all of these to thousands of dollars. Somehow it means more. So let's say you have $7,000. We're looking at the second one now. But you lose $10,000. Now you are in debt $3,000 because you not only lost the $7,000 that you had, but you also are losing $3,000 more than you have, bringing you to a negative value. Or let's think about it in terms of people with debt getting married. If I have $7,000 of debt and the person I'm marrying has $10,000 of debt, then altogether we have a debt of $17,000. Because when you have negatives and you're taking away even more money, you are left with a larger negative value. Now, not all integer problems are going to have just a negative and a positive, and that's it. Sometimes terms are going to have 2 signs, like this one. You see how instead of just +9 or -9, it's plus a -9. We're going to rewrite that. Now, the -8 is not going to change. We leave it as -8 because where we start is where we start. But how we're adding and subtracting, we can manipulate using math. If I'm adding debt, I am taking away positive money. And now I have a single sign problem, so -8 and -9 gives me -17 altogether. Let's look at our second problem. -8 just stays the same. But when I look at my second number, I have a double sign, minus a negative. I don't like minus a negative, so I'm going to rewrite the problem. Just 8. And instead of subtracting debt or taking away negatives, we add positives. So we just end up with a +17 there. You could also think about it in terms of a number line. If I'm already at 8 and I'm going to take away negatives, it's like I'm moving, this is the negative side and the positive side, I'm moving away from those negative values, 9 spaces, leaving me at a +17. That's an ugly 17, I'm sorry. 17. All right, now our last problem, let's look at it. I don't know about you, I do not see any double signs. This 8 only has one sign. and this 9 only has one sign. So since the signs, there's only one of them, and they're different, I subtract and keep the sign of the larger number. So my answer is just 1. There were no signs to change or manipulate. So here's 3 problems for you to try. Pause, try it on your own, and play and check your answer. Now, if you are completely baffled and confused, you should watch me solve these problems and then rewind and pause and do it for yourself without looking. That way you at least are getting that practice of doing it without just copying it as if it's notes. So let's look at the first one. Do we have a double sign? Yes, that plus and negative. Now the -7 just gets brought down, but adding negatives is the same as subtracting positives. And since I'm subtracting 7 and subtracting 10, I'm subtracting 17 altogether. My second problem, I don't have any double signs. So I just have a -7 and a -10, so I'm taking away 17 altogether. And my last problem, I have a double sign, that minus a negative. So I rewrite the problem, use the wrong color again, -7. And if I'm subtracting negatives, I'm adding +10. And when I look at those terms, I have a negative and a positive. The signs are different, so I subtract and keep the sign of the larger number.